Right, today we're going to open up this new little model, which is an Accucraft Ruby. It's 45mm gauge, and we're going to have a look at the kit. First of all, we've got a nice set of instructions with drawings and checklists of parts. So we'll go through that when we've got all the bits out. So this box has the stages 1 to 8. That's the top. Let's have a look in here. Just looking through the parts. I'll put that to one side for now. We've got boiler certificate, and then various parts in here, all wrapped up, ready to go, so we should be able to go through those and sort out the assembly. Well, I recognise that, that's going to be the cab. Okay, so now we're moving on. I've unwrapped some of the parts, just so we can have a better look at them, and I'm beginning to sort of familiarise myself with all the parts. So that's obviously the cab with a lift up roof. We've got the side tanks here, and here's the boiler, which I must say is a very substantial bit of kit. Look at the thickness of those bits of tube. That'll work at some pressure. Packed with a whole load of union nuts and O-rings and seals. There's another pack full of nuts and bolts with all the screws and fittings and washers. Definitely want to keep an eye on that lot, don't let them escape. And this one has the chimney and what I assume is the exhaust. And while on the subject of nuts and bolts, it's a good idea to make sure you've got all the right tooling, and you'll certainly need little screwdrivers, and I like these nut runners as well for hexagon head bolts. They come in the different sizes, mainly metric. So now we're starting assembly on the Accucraft Ruby. We had a good look through the book at all the assembly instructions, and it can look a bit daunting, but don't worry, if you do it stage by stage, it's pretty straightforward. So we're looking at stage 1, and we've got the pack for 1 out, which includes the smoke box saddle, packing pieces to go behind it, and what I would describe as the front buffer beam. And in Britain we'd expect that to be nice and red, but seeing as it's an American engine, this is the front pilot and the back drag beam. So we'll call them those names instead. So the pieces of wood for the actual drag beams, they give you a specification for the nuts and bolts to hold it on. Now that's quite important. The drawing gives you a code for the nuts and bolts. So we're looking at HM2-6. Well, once you know the code, H is for hexagon head, M2 and -6 is the length. So it's a 2mm bolt with a hexagon head and a 6mm length. And we found some packs in amongst all the nuts and bolts, and the 2mm nuts to go with them as well. But of course there's lots more nuts than we need for this job, so we've got to keep some. So I started by pushing the nuts in the holes in the back of the drag beam. I had to lay them on and then press them in like that. Then this front one's already done. It's ready to go in and tighten up. Oops. Yes, you can see why I'm using a tray here, because all these little nuts and bolts very easily get lost. The really small ones are about the size of a full stop, and if they go in the carpet, you've had it. So work on a tray. And this 3mm nut runner is the ideal size for these 2mm heads. And that is also a very useful tool. Let's put the fourth one in. and then that side is done. So just got to do the one on the other end and the other side. And then I'll come on to the saddle, which has these two packing pieces that go inside, so that sits in the actual saddle itself. And we put the bolts round the edge there, but we don't do that one yet because that's where the smoke box is going to be fitted. So just a quick update on these two components that we've finished from stage one. I ended up changing the stainless bolts for brass ones on the pilot and the drag beam. It seems like the stainless bolts end up actually on the cylinders. And with the little saddle, getting these screws in is quite awkward, but there's a little trick to it that I use. I get a bit of masking tape and I double it over and then stick it onto the nut runner, if it will stay. And then when you stick the bolt on the top, you can get it in and get started in a place which is very difficult to get to just by hand. So that completed stage one, and we went on to stage two. It started off with this little reversing lever, or Johnson bar as Americans call it. I've assembled that, and I found the easiest method was to put the pins on a nice flat surface, assemble all the other components, and then the little E-clips can go on top. You can push them in, but you need to finish them off with a little pair of pliers just to get them in the right spot. This one's a bit tricky because you've also got to press the spring down as you're putting the E-clip on. So that one's not the easiest, but it's still doable. And then we come on to the cylinders. So we've got the cylinder itself, the piston, two sizes of O-rings, front cover, two back covers, an inner and an outer, and the gaskets. So I've already got this one part assembled, but I'll show you what I've done. So I've fitted the big O-ring onto the piston. It just squeezes over like so. And then I've looked at the two back covers. There's an inner and an outer. The inner one has a groove for the small O-ring to go in, so that goes in. Now before trying it on the piston rod, I'll put the gasket over. You can feel the O-ring's fairly tight on that rod, and the outer goes on, so that traps the O-ring and makes the seal, but it doesn't move very easily. So we put a little spot of oil on it, which will just free it up, and all of a sudden away it goes. Now the same thing when it comes to putting the piston in. Once again, it needs a little spot of oil, so just a tiniest spot. And when the O-ring goes in, it puts a little bit of resistance, but if you wiggle it, it will go in. And when the oil gets all round it, it'll free up. So that's that part all going. Then the gasket goes on top of the cylinder along with the two covers, and you line the holes up. There's only two positions where they actually all line up, not four, so you've got to get them all lined up properly, and then use the stainless 2mm screws to hold it in. So that's this one already done. You can see the piston going up and down quite nicely in there. And all I've got to do is put the front one on once again with its gasket. So the front cover goes on, line up the holes, put in the bolts, So just line those up, and there is the piston. Oh, that one's not done up properly. Put the other bolt in. And that's the pistons all sorted, ready for the next part of the job.